Good evening. It's really lovely to see everyone again for the second time since we restarted. Not quite so many people here tonight, probably something to do with the subject. So we're going to explore together this thing called our core wound. And it's not the most, or it doesn't seem to be the most cheery of subjects, but I want to start by saying that in my experience, this is the gateway to enlightenment. This is the gateway to awakening. It's the best portal there is to what a lot of people talk about achieving. And you can spend decades meditating, doing yoga, standing upside down with a banana up your bottom, or whatever it is that you like to do. But until you deal with this, you ain't going to get enlightenment, in my experience. And there are all sorts of approaches. I always think there's about 5 new ones a month, mainly in California, that promise nirvana, that promise whatever it is they promise. And people look for shortcuts. And we live in a culture where everything is quick fix, instant. And I don't think it exists. I've had, like lots of you, I've had some extraordinary spiritual awakenings, short-term experiences, and that's what they are. And I remember the day when I finally decided that it's actually just another drug. That if you keep going for new peak experiences, the peak experience is just another drug. So what we're going to do is explore this from a couple of different angles. The first one, I sometimes quite like looking at this, like, if you look at an old tree, you can tell its age from the circles. I've never been able to do that. Is anyone here able to do that? Right? No. So this is the kind of, if you imagine this like a cross-section of a tree, and on the outside we might have rejection, and then we might have exclusion, we might have heartbreak, we might have abandonment. Doesn't really matter what we put in these. And there's things all the way down to what I'm going to call here is core wounding. And in my experience, both personally and clinically, it is very often it's easy to unconsciously or consciously get stuck at one of these levels because however uncomfortable it is, this becomes the protection from the inner circles. Does that make sense? And all of these things, does anyone here, is there anyone here who's never experienced rejection? Is there anyone here who's never experienced that feeling of exclusion? That for sometimes I think most of us have the experience where there's a party you don't want to go to, but then you don't get invited and you're outraged. And if you are invited, you won't go. But it's like, why haven't I been invited? Feelings, heartbreak. Anyone here never experienced a heartbreak? Never experienced abandonment? So all of this is the stuff of life. And for most of us, it's not really the core of what unsettles us. So very often, we go into therapy or we get comfortable with our abandonment. And then we create a whole lot of stories around the abandonment. And that becomes quite compulsive. We get quite attached to this story. Or we get attached to the story of heartbreak. And all of this is a way of avoiding this sentiment. What I'm saying is that there was an amazing man, 15th century, I think, German mystic called Meister Eckhart. And he said the only way out is through. Only way out is through. And in my experience, that is true. I was talking to someone before we began who said, they were maintained, but they said they feel like they're just addicted at the moment. They're just waiting for that next shot of heroin. And all addiction, we're an addicted culture. They're not a heroin addict, by the way, but it's just, Anna and I often talk about, I often say to Anna, I say, go on, go and get your next fix of heroin. and whatever it is, we've all got stuff that we're addicted to. And all addiction, essentially, is an avoidance. That's all addiction is. Addiction is, we're avoiding something. Oh, thank you so much. It's as simple as that. All compulsion is an avoidance. And it's just avoiding what's at the center. It's avoiding what's within us. And in fact, culturally, if you look at what's going on at the moment, we all avoid what's right within us by living our lives on the outside. We're obsessing about what's going on outside. And this is a cultural norm. So it's very difficult. This is countercultural. To say I'm going to work through the layers, and I'm going to get to here. And the great thing is, and we'll look at it in another way, that once you get through the core wound, that's where our true essence is. But until you get there, I don't think there's a shortcut to it. So another way of looking at this is layers. And I often say that truth is like a multi-story building. Truth is like a 37-story building, and there's truth on every floor. And you just choose which truth you want. So there might be a truth here that says, I can never be good enough. I'm sure nobody else in the room has felt that. And then there might be, the truth here that says, I have been successful. Or, I am loving and calm, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And on the layers go. And some of these layers up here is where we can, affirmations come in. And, I think affirmations are great, but they're addressing these layers here. And the problem with this thing that I'm calling a core wound is like the foundation stone. And, as it says in the Bible, if you build your house on sand, it's never going to survive. So we're building our life on a foundation stone that is wounded. That's all it is, it's wounded. And these layers here are what I call compensatory. So we compensate for the wound, all of us. And I would say, I don't know, but I would say 70 to 80%, maybe more, of the population are walking around and they have no idea what their core wound is. And they're not that interested. They're out playing golf. Maybe I'll do that next lifetime. It's but they're not interested and they don't know. So what I like about this model is once we get through the core wound, you can call this anything you like. You can call it infinite love, or you can call it the quantum field, but this is the essence of who we really are. You can call it soul. It doesn't matter what you call it. And very often we find when we're willing to encounter this, even for a few minutes, and we really take this on, we then drop into this. So that's what I'm saying. This is the greatest portal to get to this. And the thing about, just out of interest, I'm not going to ask people, do people here have a sense of what their core wound might be? Yeah? Lots of nodding? No?
I have a sense that it can't be just one.
Yeah.
Too many.
Well, that's a good question.
It's a combination, yes.
I cannot say it's one.
Okay. So I would tend to say, based on my experience and clinical experience, that there is a core wound. We all have heartbreak. We all have, addiction, rejection, abandonment, whatever. I'm not good enough. But when you sit with people and you really look at the story, then there's something that is agony in a way nothing else is.
So do you think it goes back in time? Because obviously it's the first wound.
Not necessarily the first, but it is early. The earlier it is, the more painful it is. And it might be, up until the 18th century, people thought babies were born with a tabula rasa, a blank slate. And I remember, it was a profound experience for me. It was probably over 40 years ago. I remember watching something like the 5 or 6 o'clock news, and this woman who was 8.5 months pregnant had been raped at knife point, and the rapist had held a knife to her throat. And she was taken to hospital, and there was a bank of reporters outside with, that you see those sort of 50 microphones. And the most senior surgeon in the hospital came out and addressed the press, and he said, we've run all the tests, and I'm delighted to tell you that the baby is unaffected by this experience. And, he was probably a really good man and a good surgeon, but to me, I remember watching that and just having one of those moments of being in a different world. So the point, I don't know why I said that, but the point is, even then, that was a view of the dominant narrative, because they'd run a whole lot of metrics, and none of their metrics showed a result. But our experiences, we know from 12 weeks there's something called a neural tube. And when the neural tube closes, we live off the same electromagnetic field as our mother. And there was an amazing woman, I can't remember her name, in the 60s that did experiments that showed that when a woman who was pregnant, this is in the second and third trimester, that when a woman was pregnant, when she was in a room and she decided she wanted a cigarette, not when she had one, when she decided and she went into another room to pick up a pack of cigarettes, the fetus registered distress, anxiety. Yeah. Which seemed obvious to me, but it wasn't obvious to people at the time. Do you remember the name? The Unborn Child, it's called. Anyway, amazing woman. She was way ahead of her time. So all I'm saying is that some of the dominant stories that we have are created around our early life about, one of the things that I've encountered in lots of groups, I don't know if anyone's here, but, often in family systems, one of the children is told as a dominant narrative, you're an accident. Is anyone here? Yeah. And it just makes me want to weep, actually, because when you're told that and the family system reinforces that all the time, it's like the message is you're not meant to be here. You're not meant to be here. So it happened to you, did it?
Yeah, but it's gone over my head. It's.
But what's happening in your body now?
Well, I'm so used to the idea that it doesn't it doesn't bother me anymore at all.
Okay.
It didn't really. I mean, I at the time when I was told that I was an accident, I thought, oh, you see, I'm determined. I made it in spite of being an accident.
That's great. And maybe it hasn't affected you. I don't want to put a whole lot of stuff on you. But what I would like to say to you is, and it's just one perspective. But I would say I could guarantee I'm more confident of the fact that you are not an accident than I am as to whether I love my wife or not. Seriously. Because to me, it's impossible for anyone to be an accident. It can't happen. But in my understanding of the world.
But accidents and pregnancies do happen.
I don't think so, no.
No.
But anyway, that's another story.
I remember somebody saying to me that all fourth children were accidents.
Sorry?
I remember somebody saying to me that all fourth children were accidents.
Okay.
Like nobody needs to have four.
Yeah.
But when I was pregnant with my third child, her older brothers called her Armageddon when she was in my tummy. And then when I was pregnant with my fourth child, her older brothers called her Apocalypse. Armageddon and Apocalypse. And they're true to their names.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And we do laugh about this stuff. The stories I can tell you within my... What?
So do they.
Yeah. And sometimes you can laugh about it, but for me, there's a story underneath that. In my experience of exploring these stories.
For sure. Yeah.
And...
but you only realize really that, because I'm like Rima, I've been told all my life, and it was actually, I really was not aware of how it was affecting me to be the accident.
And maybe
the fifth child, but it's only much later that you realize with the repetition of things that happen in your life that this might have really affected you. You know what I mean? Like at the time, I wasn't, if you remember, I wasn't really aware. And then you realize so much of events happen and keep happening. That is definitely related to a wound somewhere, or a belief that has started, a story that you start in your mind. So it's not so much the accident, the problem is how I took it and interpreted it and started,
But we'll come to that interplay between the experience and the environment. But just to explore some of these other things, there's a lot of people have stories about gender identity at birth. A lot of families, a lot of individuals, have a particular desire for a boy. It's rarely the other way around, but sometimes it is. And in some cultures, they destroy girls, or there's a whole lot of things that go on. So some of our core wounding comes from very early places, and we may or may not be aware of it. But in a way, it doesn't matter whether you're aware of it. Look at what's happening in your life. So one of the things we've talked about before, it's not about, I remember, again, about 40 years ago, I had this friend of mine, and she came to see me for a cup of tea one day, and she said, I've discovered, I absolutely discovered all my problems. I've discovered what happened. I said, great, what's that? She said, in the 17th century, I was raped by a bishop. so I said, okay. So I had to recover myself a bit. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But it doesn't matter what the stories are. It's like, I remember it vividly. I remember the cup I was drinking out. Patterns in Sanskrit, there's a word samskara. Sometimes it's spelled samskara. And it's a great word, but it talks about, it just means patterns. And all of us have these patterns in our life. It's got to give us that. So it's like one of the things we need to do is look at the patterns in relationships, the patterns in our life, to see what we keep playing out. Because if you don't bring awareness, it always starts with awareness. If you don't bring awareness to the pattern will just continue. The universe is made up of patterns. Nature, leaves, trees, everything is made up of patterns. And, we scientists in the UK discovered in 2003, and they got very excited, even though yogis have been saying it for 5,000 years, that each one of us, our personalities and characteristics come from 7 generations. 7 generations. And maybe it's more. So we have these ancestral lines, and the patterns play out through the ancestral line. And I would say, in my experience, the core wounding is almost always part of an ancestral pattern. It's just what we've come into. And creating some awareness of this pattern is absolutely critical in terms of moving through it. Because without awareness, there's nothing you can do about it. You just keep repeating. I remember someone came to see me once, and they were in a real state because their husband had cheated on them. And she had 2 small children, blah, blah, blah. And about 4 minutes later, it emerged the last 6 relationships, the men had cheated on her. The first husband, the man, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a pattern. And we either bring awareness to the pattern or we just keep living it out, because the pattern will keep repeating. However much consciously you try to change the pattern will keep repeating, in my experience of myself and everyone else.
Sorry, just to give an example. For example, in this example of pattern, what would the core wounding be?
Well,
I mean?
yeah, of
Like
course.
for someone who keeps
There's lots of
cheating
examples. It could be I'm not good enough. I can never be good enough. It could be I'm a substitute for someone else. It could be I'm wrong. I'm defective because I'm not a boy. I'm not a girl. It could be I don't belong. For some people, if you, lots of people have been adopted under masses of different experiences. But I'll give you another example. They've done some amazing research on C-section. And C-sections are divided into 4 different categories on the whole. And there's a difference between a planned C-section and emergency, whatever, all of that. But what they found is that in later life, but men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, so C-section, is they always over-prepare and they're never ready for anything. Always. What?
They always over-prepare.
Well, that's the trend. I'm sure there's some exceptions. But it kind of makes sense, intuitive, doesn't it? Because one of the things that we know, and I don't want to get hung up into any one particular thing, but one of the things that's rarely talked about that we know in our species, and I always mean to go and check for other species, but in the human species, it's always the baby that initiates birth. It's never the mother, always the baby. And if you have a C-section, the baby, and it might be for a really good reason, the baby is denied that possibility. So I've got a friend of mine that does some amazing work about this, and I've done some of it, but where you recreate the birth and you allow the baby to initiate when they're ready and to have that experience, because they never, ever have that experience of deciding when they want to be born. So these are, we've got bogged down in some of those experiences, but I think we all know people, if you're adopted or put into foster homes early on, of course it's going to have a profound effect on your ability to trust. And every child, what we do know is that every child whose parent walks out on them, it's normally the father, but occasionally it's the mother. But if a parent walks out on you, every child thinks it's their fault. And you can spend a lifetime telling them they didn't walk out on you, they walked out on your mother. But it doesn't count for anything, because the foundation is, because all children, if you read Piaget and Charles Sartre, all children are egocentric. They think everything revolves around them. So if a parent walks out and does, particularly they don't make an effort to be in contact with them, they think there must be something terrible about me because he doesn't want to see, he doesn't want to live with me, he doesn't want to see me. It never occurs to them it might have something to do with my mother. So,
with him.
With him, of course. And it's actually got nothing to do with anyone else other than him. That's the truth. So when you get down to the then, below the core wounding, one of the problems for all of us, and we can give some other examples, but we always operate our lives as if this is the deepest truth, whatever it is. So if you take a child like that, their deepest truth is there's something not right with them. And they'll interpret it differently. It might be, I'm unlovable. I'm unlovable. Why would my father walk out if I was lovable? And whatever the evidence is, we'll dismiss it. So I often share, I haven't talked about it for a long time, but for something like 46 years of my life, I knew that my father didn't love me. And I had this mountain of evidence that was better than any QC, including the fact he told me he didn't love me. And everywhere I went, it wasn't my core wound, but it was a dominant story. Every group I went into, oh, and my father didn't love me. What's it like to have a father who loves you? You know? And then, for the last 12 years or 15 years, I absolutely know in every cell of my body that my father loved me from the moment I was conceived up to including today. Which of those stories is true?
So can I just say something? I think you're able to know that your father loved you because that you actually said that's not your core wound. And what maybe you're coming from to say this, but in my experience of your samskara, your core wound, you know it's your core wound activated when you have a visceral reaction in your body, and that your sense of I know when my core wound's activated because my reaction is out of proportion to the event that's happened.
But even when you're in it, and even when your reaction is out of proportion, you still think it's what's just happened. I will come on to that.
Okay. I think it's really important to understand that because it helps them to identify what genuinely is the core wound in terms of the reaction to the pattern.
But it's a great question. I want to come back to the question. Which of those? So there's two statements. I absolutely know my father doesn't love me, and I know my father loves me. Which is true? Both. One was true for 48 years, and one was true. So
it's the 6 and the 9, or
but it's whatever story you want to make up. So this is the story. What Anna's saying is we act our entire life as if this is true, and the patterns, all of the patterns, originate from this. Whatever the patterns are, you know, some people say I don't like a lot of touch. Some people are touchy-feely; they're always hugging everyone. Other people, but these are the patterns that develop in our lives. Some people are very intimate in marriage. Some people aren't. We've got all sorts of patterns around it, and maybe the pattern is fine. But what we're talking about is the patterns that get in the way of our life, the patterns that ruin our life, the patterns that limit us achieving what we want to achieve. These are the ones that we want to concentrate on. Yeah. But just one other thing I want to talk about before we get on to what Anna's talking about. One of the most difficult things of all in terms of core wound is. For me, the core wound is a little bit like a nuclear reactor center, and it's affecting all areas of our life. But the truth that we all have to come to terms with sooner or later, who is feeding and nourishing and encouraging and magnifying the core wound? We are us. Yeah. The only person on the planet that is feeding this is me. There is no one else. So even Daisy, to use Daisy as an example, the 17, soon to be 18 daughter, you know, was upset about something the other day. She said, I hate all men are bastards. I hate, you can't trust any man. That's a typical kind of comment from the core wound. Because when you're in that feeling, it's like, you can't differentiate. But the only person that is keeping this alive, we're going to keep it alive. Again, I have to use the example of a 56-year-old woman that I saw once, and you know, when her child was 3 months old, her husband walked out on her, never saw him again. And she was bewildered. She said, I just cannot understand how anyone could do that. And for once I kept my mouth shut. I said, well, actually quite easily, lots of people can do that. But eventually I said, how old's your daughter? She said, 26. But she'd never moved on from that experience. And my core wound, there's lots of things happening that trigger it, but there's nobody else keeping it alive. And that's quite a big pill to swallow, because we think it's that aggressive man or that arrogant man or that institution or that we think it's something else that is creating it and it is something else activating it, but actually it's our story and we're keeping it alive. Does that make sense?
Sorry, Andrew. So presumably that happened to her when she was 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then the core wound, I thought, was something that happened to you when you were a lot younger than that.
Yes. So you're right.
How could that be her core wound?
That would have been a large echo of something that happened much earlier.
Same, the pattern.
So somebody would have walked out on her when she was a lot younger, in other words.
I don't know. Yes, maybe.
Or in an ancestral life.
I can't remember the story. But there's always the pattern. When something happens later in life, it's like the tree. It's an echo of something that's happened a lot earlier.
Okay.
even a tragedy or something. It's just an echo. I had a dear friend of mine who had 3 daughters, and all daughters died before she did. And I gave the eulogy at the funeral for the 3rd daughter. I was just agony. But it's an echo of something a lot earlier. And if we want to, we can say, oh, it's random, it's an accident. But to me, that just, it makes us like a cork bobbing on the oceans. Where do you go with that? So I wanted to say, so for me, one last question. Why would we keep the story alive so much? Because
Identity.
we all, what?
Identity.
Identity is a great answer, yeah. It's part of identity. So for me, for a long time, my father didn't love me, it was part of my identity. And who would I be if you take that away? I don't know. Because I've lived with it for decades. Or I'm an accident. If you take that away, who would I be? Because I've lived my whole life, I'm an accident. But I think there's 2 even more powerful reasons why it does become part of identity. And the first reason is, there's various ways of saying this, but we want the universe to know. And you can even put how terrible it was. So what happens with every core wound, Nara just touched on it there, is when it happens, the environment always has a different story to our experience. So if you take an example of someone who's sexually abused, a young girl, 2 or 3 or 4, doesn't matter. But the environment tends to say, if you tell anyone, no one will believe you, and, blah, 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 blah. And the research they've done is with sexual abuse, physical abuse, all sorts of horrible experiences. If the environment at the time says, this is inappropriate, it shouldn't have happened, that person is not well, blah, 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 that they don't get that wounded by it. It's the dissonance between the experience and the environment that causes the biggest wound. Yeah? And I would still say there's a correlation between that if you look at the world collectively and you look at us individually. We live in a world where everything is image. Identity is image. That's why we build an identity. The bigger the gap between the image and the reality, the bigger the problem. The bigger the gap between the image and the reality, the bigger the problem. And that's in us individually. When we all know people whose whole life is image. And in fact, in 1930, and it's even happened recently, when everyone lost their money, there were grown men jumping from 6th, 7th floor stories out of the windows to their death because they lost their money. But when they were 19 or 20 at university, had their money, they were happy as Larry. They just created an identity, and then they couldn't live with the image. So there's a gap between the inner experience and the outer reality. A father said, I remember when the 3rd daughter was born. I now have 4 daughters. My 3rd daughter, and everyone said to me, oh, you love her, she's ugly, you don't really mind her to cry. I said, no, I would have liked a son. And people could not handle that. Honestly, they closed it. People were horrified.
In this culture, especially.
Yeah.
If you go to Lebanon,
So what most people do is they lie to themselves, or and it's very quickly recovered. Oh no, I'm so happy. She's gorgeous, and aren't I lucky 3 daughters? So there's a dissonance between, and it's really important with any trauma. All the research shows. I'll give you another example. If somebody witnesses a bad road accident where someone's died, what happens is they start to feel cold and they shake. Their whole body shakes. And the first thing the paramedics do when they arrive is give them an injection to stop them shaking. Shaking is a normal, healthy reaction of an organism to trauma. And I remember the first time I worked with someone and I thought they were having an epileptic fit because they were shaking so much. A lot of trauma is worked out through shaking the body because, as Anna said earlier, the core wounding is essentially visceral. Trauma is a physiological experience. It's not psychological, it's not emotional. And that trauma is not well understood. So people spend decades in therapy talking about the problem. Talking will not heal trauma. Never can, never will. It's a physiological experience. And the trauma needs to be released through the body. Yeah? So the first thing is, the reason that we keep creating it is we want to tell the world, this happened and it was horrible. We keep wanting to tell them this happened. It's even collective traumas. people experience collective trauma, they pass it through, never forget, keep telling the next generation in case we forget. So this is very, very powerful for all of us. And the second thing is a fantasy that if we recreate it in the present and we fix it, we can make it not happen. So with a lot of unpleasant experience, particularly with children, most people in the world have experienced children have to, whatever. But children very quickly want to try and pretend it didn't happen. And adults do it even more. There's lots of adults that pretend, things that are uncomfortable didn't happen. And so we have this fantasy that if we recreate it, if we're abandoned all the time, and we can make sure somebody doesn't abandon them, or we fix the effect, there's a magical thinking that we can make it not have been so horrible. And the truth is, we can't change the past. NLP, one of the, I'm not having a knock at NLP, but one of the sort of managers of NLP says we can change the past. You can't change what happened. You can change the stories, so you can create a different story, but you can't change what happened. And in most experiences, until we get seen, until we get someone to witness what happened, this happened. Yeah. And we understand we can't actually go back and change it. That's magical thinking.
You can change the way.
You can change the story you've got about it.
What they say.
Or your
You
reaction.
can release the trauma.
Yeah.
Well, the perception, the whole perception.
Because the truth is, and this is why you need to release it, as Lara said, if say we're 2 or 3 years old and our father walked out on us, the truth is it's got nothing to do with anyone but the man. That's his story. It's actually got nothing to, it might affect other people, but it's actually the only person that's to do with is him. Yeah? So the ultimate story is that actually it's not doing it.
Can I just ask something to do with the identity part? If you manage to release the core wound or whatever, and so you lose that identity that you thought was yours, for you to reach that true essence state that you're talking about, do you think you have to go through feeling lost?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Feel the pain.
So it's
No, but lost specifically. Because if you lose the identity, then do you have a phase where you are?
Who are you?
Yeah. You're completely lost. You just don't know.
Of course. And it's a little bit like, I think it might be like, it's not a perfect analogy, but if you have a leg amputated, you keep feeling your leg. That's part of the grieving process. If you give up smoking, I can remember feeling that you lose the identity of smoking and there's a loss, even though it's destructive, and I know it's destructive. You can have a destructive habit that you give up and there's a loss. Because, smoking is a big image, less so now, but when I grew up, it was cool. So all of these things, I always think of Dirk Bogart when I think of smoking, that trillion, it just looks so cool. Okay. So if this doesn't make sense to people, please speak up, because we can look at it, we can try and explain it in a different way. But I want to go to what Anna was talking about, because, and it doesn't matter if it's one or the several, but the first thing that happens is that there's a trigger. And I assume that everyone in this room knows what it's like to be triggered. It feels like you've been punched in the stomach, or it's a visceral feeling. Does anyone not know that feeling? Yeah. So we all know this feeling. Sometimes there might be small triggers or big triggers, but we're going to talk about it. I will tell that story. So the number one, I think there's 4 stages. The number one, if we start getting into the solution, the number one thing beginning to deal with our core wound is to create a gap between the current experience, what's happening, and the past. And another way of putting that is to understand that this has nothing to do with the trigger. The trigger is the catalyst. And what happens when we're triggered, we give all the responsibility to the catalyst. How dare he treat me like that? How dare he say that? How could she just turn her back on me when I'm in the middle of, and just pretend I don't exist? It's agony when it happens. And we want to project it all onto the trigger, the catalyst, or whatever. I've done that the wrong way around, actually. But anyway. And for me, the number one thing when we begin to deal with the core wound is you have to create a big gap between what's actually happening and to understand. So one of my mantras is, this is old, this is old, this is old, this is an old wound, this is an old. I keep telling myself it's got nothing to do with what just happened, nothing. And there's lots of examples of, people are driving along and someone cuts in, they get out of the car with an armbar and try to kill the person. I mean, they just cut in on them. But there's tons of examples like this. Something's been activated. And Anna and I were laughing the other day because...
Shall I tell the story?
Yeah, you won't tell it as well.
I will. Last Saturday, I'd been away for a week, and I came home. We drink this coffee substitute called barley cup at home, and for some bizarre reason, we decant it into this one jar. So I've just been reunited with Andrew after a week away, all very nice. And after supper, I go to make myself my barley cup, and he's just had a drink, taken it upstairs to our TV room, and I go in, and the jar is empty. And I think he is the most selfish arsehole on this planet. How would he not have refilled the jar? Because he would know that I would want to drink this drink. So I take the jar upstairs, our television was upstairs, try to show him this jar. He's just innocently watching the sport and telling me, and I said, turn that down. I've got the jar. And I said, look, what do you think this is? Well, why? He goes, what's the right? I said, I cannot believe you did not refill the jar. I said, you are the most selfish man on the planet. He goes, I really don't think that's selfish. I said, how can it not be selfish? He goes, well, I would refill it next time I need it. I know, but I wanted to drink. The rage I felt was so off the Richter scale. I thought, I cannot sit in this room and watch television this man anymore. I said, I cannot believe it. We had this great debate about what selfishness is. He's like, I'm just trying to diffuse it. Just can't. I said, no, I'm going to bed. So go to bed. It's 7:30 in the evening. I have rage thudding through me, and I've learned all these things being Andrew. I let it thud. I just lie there and just pounds, and I start thinking. I'm really thinking. I can see my reaction. It's not about the lack of barley cup in the jar. It's to trigger this visceral rage in me. But I'm so thick, even after 10 years of living with my husband, working on my core wound for 10 years. I know my core wound's been active. I know my rage is off, but I don't know why. Anyway, eventually I exhaust myself like an overtired, strung child, fall asleep, Andrew goes to bed, we don't sleep. The next one he gets up really early, he goes in, and I go into his study for round 2, and he just comes towards me, and he puts his arms around me, he goes, come on, I'm sorry, I've got it now, I'll refill the thing immediately. And I said, I just cannot understand why I'm so furious. And I'm having a really difficult time with my father at the moment. He goes, yeah, it's because your father didn't meet your needs, and he's not now. And I went, oh my God, that's it. And immediately the whole thing dissipated. So that's a really good example when I could tell that obviously this reaction is out of proportion. I'm feeling the visceral thudding. I cannot tell you the level of rage I felt in my body. And even though I'm projecting on Andrew, I kind of knew this is out of proportion and it's a visceral reaction. But even then, I can't quite link it back to the core in my relationship with my father.
The reason that's such a good example is in the morning, I said to you, it's got nothing to do with me. And that you're almost going to go off again. You couldn't. He said, what do you mean it's got nothing to do? He's like, you left everything empty.
Yeah.
I said, it's got nothing to do with me. I said, it's just your father. And Anna's core wound is related to her father. And like all of us, actually, I'll come back to it. But over the last several weeks, it's been coming up big time.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of patterns playing out that are the same with Anna and with our daughter. So, but even Anna has huge awareness, huge insight into all this stuff. But the point of the core wound, when you're in it, you want to blame someone else. Yeah. We all do, and it's compulsive.
Yeah.
And people say, yes, but he did that. Yes, he had an affair. Yes, he left the barley jar empty, whatever. And I always say it's got nothing to do with that. Nothing. So it's quite a radical place. But I say literally it's got nothing to do with what is happening outside. Because this wound existed before you even met this person. This wound existed before that dynamic happened. So it's about taking responsibility. The first step is really about taking responsibility. And it's really hard to do.
But when you do it, the liberation is there. So the minute Andrew said that, I was like, oh, yeah, of course.
And we just laughed. We were laughing. Yeah.
But the awareness is liberating. When you were talking about your descriptions on the first page of what it is to live once you've gone through the core, for me, that word is freedom.
Yeah.
All the recognition that all these things that triggered you and sent you insane before, to be free from that is so liberating. And being able to look in your life and think, gosh, 3 years ago, that would have really set me off.
Exactly.
And now it doesn't.
But even if it does set you off, I feel, 3 years later, the degree of the setup
Exactly,
is so
yeah.
much milder.
Echo is
And
such
then-
a good word for it.
It's an echo.
Yeah, it's an echo as opposed to the DEFCON
And
one.
eventually the
Yes.
echo goes away. But I really urge you that even if you're in a mild one, just watch how you won't let go of holding someone else responsible.
Mm.
And I honestly mean it. It's never, ever, 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 ever got anything to do with what's happening in that moment. Even though somebody's behaving badly, somebody doesn't matter. We get attached to the behavior of someone else. And it's not about that. So if we're interested in healing the core wound, we have to start from this place. And maybe we start by doing it in hindsight. Maybe after the event, we go and say, well, actually, I can see that this is a trigger. I get triggered every time. Every time someone excludes me from a conversation, I get triggered. It's going to keep happening. That's the guarantee. It's going to keep happening and happening and happening until we get the lesson. And actually, it tends to get louder and louder. And right now, because of where we are in evolutionary terms or astrological terms, all of this stuff is coming up. You see it in the collective with slavery, Black Lives Matter, gender issues. It's coming up hugely, and it's coming up individually. Is that good or bad? Neither. It's healing. It's coming up to be healed. But it is agony. And anyone who's ever known this knows that it's incredibly painful. The second thing is to be willing to experience the feelings. Once we've separated the old experience from the new, it's critical. It's like you create a gap. We have to be willing to drop into the experience. So it's like you were saying, Shireen, to experience the loss. We all know what loss is. We all know what grief is. But for a child whose parent died, or for a child, we all got stories of children that are told, don't go to the funeral, all sorts of things that happen. And the reason we need to do this is that it's unresolved. It's unresolved. We're all walking around with many unresolved heartbreaks, many unresolved rejections, abandonments, whatever. If they were resolved, fine. When they are resolved, freedom. 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 And the thing about this, I really want to distinguish between three. This is slightly difficult, but we start with three positions. We can deny it. We deny the original experience, which lots of us do. I grew up in a huge family system of denial. Secondly, we can enter into the experience in order to be free. And the third one is have the experience. We ought to actually put in another one. Talk about it.
Understand also what's happening.
You don't need to understand. You really don't. What we tend to do is there'd be a great comedy sketch here. We're in denial. We go into therapy for 10 years. We learn to talk about how terrible it was, and then we keep talking about it. But this is the subtle one in the middle, where we go into the loss because we want to be free of it. It doesn't work. It's what you need to do is just drop into the experience without an end game. So I often refer to it as being willing to drown in the feeling. It's being willing to drown in it. Anyone who's had any intense experience, you drop it. When you have strong emotion, particularly sadness, and you really, really watch it, there's a moment when you think you're not going to survive it. And that's the feeling, when you're being willing not to survive it. And then it clears unbelievably quickly. And the thing is, once you fully experience it, I've had the experience many times, but experiencing it for 2 or 3 minutes, you cannot get it back. You cannot get it. You can be so triggered by what someone said or whatever. And then you go to the experience. You don't talk about it. You don't deny it. You don't try to have it so that you move through it. You genuinely just go into the experience. And it'll pass through incredibly quickly. And you cannot get it back. And that's what I'm advocating. Once you understand that it's nothing to do with the present, you drop into the original experience. And the thing is, nobody in the history of the human race has ever drowned in the experience. But you've got to just let go. It's like letting go of everything. and just having the experience. Does that make sense?
Not too much sense.
What?
Sorry.
And funny enough, Lara had an experience recently where she did this, and it just moved through.
Can you share your experience?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing, but there is just one thing about. Okay, I'll take mine rather than coming back to the coffee of Anna. I just had a phone call from Andrew that someone was trying to reach him to see him. And I got very triggered because the core wound here is, again, that's my story that I built, that I'm completely transparent. Nobody sees. This person had not acknowledged all of the work I've been doing with Andrew, how close I was to Andrew, the work we're doing here for several years. And she went through someone else to try and reach Andrew. So before responding to Andrew, I was in such rage and I was crying like a little girl, thinking, I cannot believe. First, this person is resurging from the past, because she was dead for.
Thought we dealt with her.
I thought I had dealt with her.
Done her, got the t-shirt, who's next?
So why she's back, and also because I know, in my head, the story continued, and she's going to do things with Andrew. She's going to be recognized and seen by everyone, which this is the story. And then Andrew, we talk when I'm finally ready to talk to Andrew, and he says, look, just sit with it and try to really feel this pain. And then we'll discuss it more later. But of course, when I sat with it long enough, and I really, really was, I don't know about, how much you cried or did the tantrum for the coffee, but I really was not well because it was a lot. It was a whole past story coming back. And then I started laughing after, I could not believe what I just had. I thought I really was laughing.
Out-of-body experience, kind of?
Yeah,
No, in her body
in
experience.
my body. But the laughter was a little bit I can't believe how stupid I was to just, feel
But
this,
it is
because
funny. It's funny.
It is funny.
Yeah,
It is
it's
really
funny.
funny. And then it turns out when things like that, I don't know, but I think when you accept it and you say, of course, it was difficult for me to feel. I'm happy for that person that she's going to get healed in a way, like I was. It was difficult to feel this for her, but I eventually felt maybe that's a start of, something for her to be healing. We're going to maybe, who knows?
But once it's gone, it's gone. Even if you fully experience it goes. Whatever you fully experience. The best example of this is small children. They're playing, they're really happy. Someone walks in the room, picks up a toy they haven't got, and they're enraged. They didn't even know the toy existed, and they're enraged, having a tantrum. And then they're laughing again. And then they move through this stuff really quickly. The problem is, as adults, we've forgotten how to do that. And most adults, wouldn't be comfortable doing that. And I'm not suggesting that you have to go and sit in Nobu and do it in Nobu. But I mean, it's my wife would.
But also the purpose of doing all this work is to act from a place of center, not from a place of tantrum.
Anne and I went to Tuscany one year, and this elderly couple, we were sitting on this veranda, this elderly couple came out and sat opposite us, about as far as Anne and Anna, we've got a drink.
In a hotel.
In a hotel. And all of a sudden, Anna gets up, and she goes over to this woman, and she grabs her and starts sobbing uncontrollably. If you think crying the other night was bad, this was uncontrollable sobbing. And this woman's husband looked at me, and I just sat there, And this woman was amazing, but it went on for a long, long time. And I just carried on with my drink, as you do. And then after a while, this woman's saying, they're there, and Anna's saying, I've lost my mother, and all of this. And then we're just laughing. We could not stop laughing because it was so funny. And this poor woman, she was, and Anna's mascara was all down this way. She had a cashmere jumper.
Green cashmere jumper, which I just couldn't help myself. She was amazing about it.
She was amazing. And even the bloke, we had a real laugh. And of course, every time we saw them in the hotel after that, they were like, So, look, it happens. But there are not many people who do that. So it's just experiencing it because it passes through really quickly. And we started off talking about addiction. We avoid intense feeling because particularly in this culture, in Latin America, some other cultures, they're more familiar with feeling. Some family systems, Anna's family system, is much more into being honest about feelings than mine was. So all our family systems vary. My father, bless him, he literally didn't know what a feeling was. If it jumped up and bounced him in the face, he would have said, "What's that?" So,
But you do need to know, when you are in that rage or that feeling or that crying, it's very helpful to know why, what's the core, again, the core wound. I know you don't need to understand what happened, but you do need to understand
I
why.
remember being in India one time. I think it was out there for a 6-week process. It was pretty intense. And we were going to this very, very special temple, and everyone was on the bus. There was probably about 30 people dressed up in all their white stuff and their beads and all this. And suddenly I got this attack of real destructiveness. And I was sitting there imagining blowing this temple up with hand grenades and rocket launchers. And I was building and building and building and feeling like I wanted to destroy everything. And then suddenly I burst out laughing and I forgot myself. So I just laughing uncontrollably, just watching the destructiveness and just being very present to it. And because I was in a process, I was very present to that destructive energy. And then I just couldn't stop laughing. So, as I say, we've all got lives and there's certain situations where, but by and large, if you're triggered, you're walking around like an insane person anyway. I mean, Anna, over, Bali, she's like an insane woman. So
yeah, but what I was going to say was, I think one of the benefits of addressing your core wound, to trying to experience it, is by not doing it, you're more likely to sabotage things in your life.
Yeah, of course.
So I have definitely, when I was acting out of my core wound, I've sabotaged career opportunities. And now I look back and think, but because when you're in it, you are not in your centre. Exactly that. So you're off your centre, you're triggered, you're reactive. And though it's quite useful to watch the patterns in your life where you sabotage situations, and the chances are that came from being triggered from your core wound.
So just moving through this, this is really, really simple. It's one of the most simplest things in the world. I would then say that once you're in there, you create another gap. So what you're doing is you're maybe understanding comes in here. You create a gap and thinking, this was a long time ago. This is not happening now. You're crying now. You want to kill someone now, whatever. But this is not happening now. It's an original experience. You create a gap. And then the fourth phase is you begin a new story. Because once the original story has lived itself out, I remember, in our marriage, in the early years of our marriage, we had great volatility. And we both behaved incredibly badly. Anna, of course, worse than me, as you can imagine. We both behaved incredibly badly. And we were like petulant children. And we were acting out our core wound. Relationships, as we all know, is where this stuff gets played out, big time. And even if you're not volatile, lots of couples do the quiet sulking routine, or the not talking routine, or the let's be polite to each other routine, or whatever. It doesn't matter what your pattern is. And we went to see Fiona Riga, who some people know. And Fiona just kept saying to her, your dance is your dance, it'll burn out when it burns out. And in a way, one day we woke up and there's no more energy behind it. We just don't do that now at all.
Because you're both aware of it.
Well, I'm not saying we couldn't, but it's like, it's about taking responsibility, having experience, understanding it's not about each other. It's really not. And I think we both understand that. And then you begin to create a new story. And what people want to do, they want to go from here to here. And there are some therapies, approaches, call them what you will, that encourage that. Bypass the process. And God, I've tried most things. I haven't tried everything, but I have tried most things. I haven't tried the one leg in the Himalayas, banana up the bottom. But if someone said that was the thing that did it, I'd be on the plane. I really would. So, in my experience, it's bringing awareness to it and not being embarrassed about it, or not being, there is some embarrassment, there's some shame around some of this stuff. Shame is a killer. Because the essence, the definition of shame is keep it hidden. Keep it hidden. In some family systems, the British culture is a bit like this. Keep it hidden. My family was just like that. Don't talk about it, keep it hidden.
Or
what?
Share it with the world so that you don't get ridiculed.
Say that again, I missed that. Something.
So either shame is about hiding it or like ridicule yourself, basically, so that other people don't shame you.
But I think some people that do that are compensating for the hiding. They're so fed up with the hiding, they go on television and blurt it all out. So I don't think there's any exception. If you're in shame, you want to hide it. You really do. And it's a little bit like sometimes if people cry, they say, I'm so sorry. They apologize. Or, in a social situation. Or I remember going to a dinner party once. I was sitting around this table and I started sobbing. And it's not what most people want to happen at a dinner party. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. But normally what happens is in most situations, not all, not if you're with the British aristocracy, but if you're in a small group and someone cries or they're vulnerable, everyone feels drawn to them. Don't you have that experience? Or not? I do,
I feel drawn, yeah.
Yeah, people feel drawn to them, but the person themselves often, suddenly starts to panic because there's a sense of tension and vulnerability is coming up, and I don't want to be vulnerable.
At any point, do you need to be acknowledged for what you're feeling, or you're saying the same? You don't.
I do think you need to have your experience witnessed in some way. Yes. Yeah.
You'd be witnessing it for yourself, or witnessed by
another? I think you need to have it. The most important thing is to experience it yourself, and then you can move through it. But I think, in my experience, you need someone else to understand what you've lived through. Most of us. So
an acknowledgement of
it.
Yeah. But the witness.
Sorry, Alex. No, I was just going to say, because when you're acknowledged, you talk a little bit about it, you feel the experience, your confidence grows. And then I remember an exercise Christina had asked me to do years ago, I don't know, before COVID anyway. And I just was completely unable to do it. Unwilling and unable. Like even if I was willing to do it for the session, I just could not, because I was full of rage and felt that I needed, what's the word, amendment? Like I needed someone to say, we understand how you're feeling. It must be very hard. But this never happened. But I I just managed, I think, better anyway, to go through it, to go through the rage, through the pain, gain a lot of confidence about it, take responsibility for, and just be less triggered. Now I'm sure I can do the exercise now.
and we're talking about a level of intensity that doesn't always exist with this stuff. So you might have someone who's very shy. We all know people who are shy, a little bit, find it difficult to come forward. That's just a pattern. Is another, and the reasons people are shy vary enormously. There's not one, but the pattern of being in the world might be that they're always shy. Now they might be really comfortable with that. It might, and that's fine. But if it's holding them back from putting their hand up or going for better jobs or finding a spouse or whatever it is, I don't know. But it's the patterns that are holding us back in some way. That's the sort of entry point to this. And also most of us, Anna does most things at volume 9 or volume 10, but you can do it at volume 3 or 4. And most of us are aware of sort of the patterns that we have. And we sometimes get into defending them. We sometimes say, well, that's who I am. But Anna used to say that to me a lot. But that's who I am. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, but it's what you want to change. And what are we willing? And again, it's a little bit like an archaeological dig. We've often talked about the iceberg. But this is just 5 to 10% of who we are. And it's as we get into some of the deeper stuff, we go, oh my God. And again, there's a lot of talk at the moment about unconscious biases and all this other stuff. Of course, there's a whole lot of stuff there. And one of the things that we all know, we've all got, unconscious assumptions, things about what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a man. And maybe we're fine about those. But maybe they get in the way of the level of intimacy we have. Or maybe they get in the way of how we interact with people in the workplace or whatever. It doesn't matter. But normally there's something we're protecting. A wound. A wound is sometimes I always used to describe it like I used to feel like a prawn without a shell. It's just a very vulnerable feeling when you're really in that. And then someone prods you. So,
it takes long to break habits.
it takes a long time. Yeah. And this is part of, if you look at it from the point of view of evolution, we've got 2 billion years of evolution behind us. We've got 2 billion years of evolution ahead of us. Whether planet Earth exists or not, who knows? But it's still going to evolve. And we're coming in at a moment in time, and we're living this lifetime. And of course, we get very attached to this lifetime. I was talking to someone about we get very attached to this lifetime, but it's just part of the journey. And we're here, for me, that whatever the core wound is, that's what we're here to heal. That's what we're here to, we've chosen it on some level. And that's what we're here to heal, to work through, and we'll never come back to it again. Unless we choose not to do it. So, maybe we spend 3 or 4 lifetimes on one particular thing. But you see it in people. The people who come here regularly, Lara shared about herself, you begin to see what patterns are for each of us. And it just makes sense. The more, Anna talked about the freedom, but it just makes more sense of who I am and what I'm doing here. And it makes more sense of the ancestral line. And whatever we clear up in this lifetime, we don't pass on to our children. What we don't clear up, we pass on, and that's fine too. It's hard to understand this, but the Hope the Elders say, whatever we heal in this lifetime, we heal 7 generations forward, and we heal 7 generations back. We literally retroactively heal it. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But it's part of the collective. Whatever we heal in these things, we're also healing on behalf of the collective. Sorry.
So it's so connected, because when you have this pain, you disconnect with yourself.
Yeah.
And you start being aware of the pain, and in my case, and why this pain, what's originally happened, and you connect gradually back with yourself, and this connection heals you anyway. I think to be connected with your core self.
It's all connected, and of course we're all connected with the collective, not just the human species, but all life forms. But anyone with a scrap of objectivity, not that I think objectivity exists, but anyone who looked around the planet would observe that the human species is not in great shape. Essentially, I think, I don't know how many, 7 billion, 8 billion people, I think everybody kind of intuitively knows that we're on a pathway to destruction. If you took the population as one person, it's a narcissistic, out of control addict. We can't get enough. Nothing seems to satisfy. We get the new car, the new house, the bigger house, and it doesn't land. It doesn't work. It used to work for a little time. It doesn't work anymore. We get the bestseller, we get whatever it is, it doesn't work. So we're on this pathway to self-destruction, not just self-destruction, but we're going to destroy thousands of other species and maybe the planet itself. But it's like we need to change direction. And I've been saying for 2 years, the only shift we really need to make is from reliance on the outer to the inner, because that's what will change the world we're in. And one of the things, everyone might have a different view on this, but one of the things that I think I've been quite shocked about, actually, I was talking to Daisy, because she's going to be 18 on Monday, and so it's a big time. And she was at a very expensive school and everything, but all her friends, without exception, lost their virginity when they were 14, 15, 16. And she's the kind of child that we sit around the lunch table and she gives us all the graphic detail of whatever, and sometimes I slope off or whatever. But anyway, and what she said to me the other day, she'd worked out, she has 3 or 4 really good male friends that have come to the house. And what she worked out is all these boys, they all shag around and they take girls' virginity and blah, blah, blah. And Daisy's not up for that. So Daisy's the one they all take back to their parents. So she gets taken back to the parents, she gets taken on holiday with them. And she sees this split in the male psyche. And she knows all her friends have respect for her because she doesn't want to shag them. And she has some really good friends, and she meets her families. But her friends, what she observed is with all of these boys, pretty much exclusively actually, all of these boys, once they've shagged you, they delete your number from their phone. And they don't want to know you anymore. Isn't that true? With all these boys. And I was a little bit shocked because, you know, I had an experience when I was growing up 50 years ago, but for all this narrative in the media, all this narrative about wokeness and all this change, that the boys that we meet haven't changed a bit. I would say it's worse, if anything. And some of the experiences, okay, go for
Forgive
it.
me, no.
Yeah,
Your language, these boys take the virginity.
yeah. The girls.
Some of those girls are happily
A
giving it.
lot of them are, yeah.
And so,
Definitely.
and as I say, it's not to say that they are by any means, you know, suddenly sort of, oh my gosh,
No.
deleted me from his phone, or oh well, that's
No,
fine,
no.
delete me from his phone. But as in, I do think that there is an element
Of course it is.
girls
Of course it is.
still.
And you know,
of
I
that sort
remember
of,
Anna
if I do
being
this,
shocked
I'm
when we
done.
met each other, and you know, the thing at Marlborough was that the girls gave boys blowjobs for 50p, and then boys were filming them on their phones, and it was going on. This was common. 50p. Was it too bad? But anyway, look, it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is these patterns,
No, of course.
for all the trying to change the narrative, it hasn't changed a thing. And I feel sad for these boys and for these girls because it's not.
But I was to say, because those narratives quick because the girls still feel as though they have to. They work.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're happy
Yeah.
to. And well, what you said about, you know, we've got 2 billion years worth of
Yeah.
evolution. So suddenly to expect a narrative to change, you know, within 50 years,
Yeah.
say between the difference between your generation
Yeah.
and what we got up to with girls for 50 pence and what Daisy's experienced,
Yeah.
then it's
And it's different from culture to culture. But I'm just saying the patterns in gender are very strong. And, you know, of course, you've got race issues and all these other things, and they're all coming up. And we've got to look at them. They're not comfortable. But it is difficult to look at them and it's very difficult. Look at how difficult it is to have a voice if you want to say something that doesn't fit the dominant narrative. It's really, immediately you get shat on. And this approach isn't working, but it's the same for the individual. You know, I remember when I went to work in a city in 1973, and for 20 years, I wish I had £1 for every man that said to me, I was physically beaten at boarding school from the age of 7 to 9, pretty much every day. And I wish I had a clip for every man that said, never did me any harm, character building. It wasn't character building. It was fucking painful and lonely and horrible. But it still goes on. So it's like it's difficult to change. I wanted to punch them in the face, but of course I never did. So, you know, it's about, you can't change it out there, but you can change it in here. And then you can find your voice. And there are millions of people on the planet that are being more honest with themselves and others. And one of the other things, we must finish, but one of the other things I've been saying a lot recently, and other people are saying it, now is a time when we need to find our tribe. We need to gather together. Like, you know, Lara does this amazing evenings here. We need to come together. We don't all agree with each other. We've got different views of the world, different views about girls and about all this stuff. But we need to come together and connect. Because a lot of people, I'm lucky, and Anna and I are lucky, because most people in our life, you know, experience who we are. But a lot of people find it difficult to be in the workplace or to be elsewhere, to fit in with whatever they think their tribe is. And I was saying to someone, I can't remember who, but before we started, but over the last 10 years, one of the things Anna and I have noticed is that we've let a lot of people go from our lives and new people have come into our life. And to me, it's really simple that all of us have the experience. You can go meet someone for a cup of tea, go for lunch, go to whatever, and there might be people you've known, there might be people you went to school with, but you always walk away feeling drained and exhausted. And there's other people you go and have a cup of tea with or whatever, you can sit for hours and you come away feeling animated. I don't want to spend time around those people that exhaust me.
What do you tell them?
Sorry?
What do you tell them?
A range
When
of
they
things.
ask
Yeah, a range of
I'm
things.
struggling.
Yeah, a range of things. Yeah.
So just
I have said to people, you know, every time I see you, I feel exhausted. I feel like you're an energy. I've called people an energy vampire. It's like they suck the energy out of you.
what if they're going through a hard time in their life?
I think that's different. You see, it comes back to this distinction that if people are talking about it the whole time, and I've been there many times, you talk about it. We all know people, every time you see them, it's the same conversation. They're just stuck in it. They're not experiencing it. And so, you know, if they're stuck in the talking about it, I don't want to collude with it, because one of these things in life, it's really difficult and it's subtle, but you end up colluding with something and being part of the problem. Yeah. But people who are in pain, of course, I spend a lot of time with people who are vulnerable or hurting. I mean, it never drains them. So it's a
But
subtle.
when they're experiencing.
Yeah.
But when they're just talking about
When they're
it,
talking
it's
about
draining.
it, yeah. When are you going to do something about it? And when you sit with people like that, and you say, well, you've been talking about this for 5 years. It's the same, when are you going to do it? They get really angry. And actually, then they don't want to see you. But, we're all in this together. And I think we need more freedom. And I think we need more awareness of these things.
And more self-honesty, because it's the self-honesty that leads to awareness, that leads to freedom.
Yeah. It's quite difficult to sit in a group. It's not for Anna, but it is quite difficult. It would be quite difficult for me to sit in a group and admit you're enraged, you want to kill someone because there's not enough barley in the, but
Not enough, none.
there wasn't it. Any other question? Are we going to? I never know what time we eat.
No.
No, yeah. Any other questions?
Andrew.
Yeah.
I still sort of go back to the core. I don't know. Maybe all of you know what the core is. I don't know what the core is.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not the only one.
Is it trauma? Is that? I mean, what I'm hearing is core wound is trauma.
Yeah, but are we talking? This is it. I mean, trauma. Yeah, I can identify with trauma, but trauma I'll identify with it as an adult. I don't think I can remember a trauma as a child.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So if core goes back to your childhood.
Yeah, you don't need to go back to your child. Just think of the patterns that have gone on in your life. So you've been through quite a difficult divorce. Yeah.
Anybody who didn't know that? No.
Sorry, they do that. Yeah. But there were particular circumstances around that, which I won't go into, of course.
Are you sure?
Look at the patterns and see what they really mean. Because what we do is we give the responsibility to the external. We say, yes, but that wasn't right, or blah, blah, blah. And it's when we look at the patterns of what's being created, you'll get little aha moments. And you'll begin to see, because they're different for all of us, really different. I mean, the things that trigger Victoria, I might say, well, why on earth do you trigger, it doesn't make sense. I'm fine with it. The things that trigger me, Victoria say, what on earth do you worry about that for? It's really different, although there would be some commonality. Rejection is painful. Nobody likes rejection, and yet there's many scenarios that I always talk to Lara about. If someone says to me, you're a fraud or you're a charlatan, it never touches me. There's certain things that wouldn't touch me. If certain people reject me for certain things, you're stupid. I know I can be incredibly stupid. Lots of things don't touch me, and then there's something that gets under the radar. And you just know there's a bit of work to do with that.
I think this idea of patterns is a big takeaway from
the idea of
patterns.
Yeah.
Thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I think this idea of triggers always being about someone else or something else. That's not always the case for me. I would immediately bring it back to it's me, it's my fault. I bypass the other. And so the awareness and what have you is there.
Yes.
But then you get stuck into what's really going on, or at least for me. So I think in terms of the deeper exploration, this pattern, in terms of homework, that's going to be important for me.
Yeah, there is. You also raised something else that's really, really important. I'm glad you said that. Is lots of people automatically blame themselves for everything, and that's the pattern.
Yeah.
There's lots of people, and actually their journey is to learn to shout at other people, is to learn to absolutely explode with other people, because it all goes, I'm this horrible person, and I always get it wrong, and Uriah Heep type, and that's the pattern. So we're not defending that, and we're not advocating that. We've all got different patterns. And I think exploring the pattern is incredibly liberating. That's really where it begins.
But then if there's something ancestral, as you said,
yes,
how do you work out what it is that you've inherited through lineage of ancestry?
Well, if you look at Middle Eastern cultures, I don't know a lot about.
I don't know anything about that.
No, exactly. But if you look at Middle Eastern cultures, even today, there's a very clear divide between male and female. There's a very different divide between, in some countries, I think women are still not allowed to own property, are they? In Kenya, they're not, I don't think.
Really?
Yeah. And it wasn't that long ago when, in this country, women couldn't own property. But the point is that there are still very strong gender differences that will affect people if you grew up in that culture. How could that not affect someone? There's patterns around education.
Yeah.
I remember 15 years ago, they did this exercise in a school about gender equality and blah, 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 blah. And these feminists were going to schools and it was all being filmed and blah, blah, blah. And what they found is that boys were always asked more difficult questions than girls, unconsciously. Those patterns are just very strong, whether we like it or not. And it's not great for boys, by the way. The perpetrators and victims are equally hurt. Again, it's controversial to say that. Nobody wants to be, but they're just part of these boys. Some are really nice boys, but
one doesn't exist without the other.
No. So
Yeah, exactly.
But if you live in a culture where women, especially young women, continue, the more scant to address they are.
Yeah.
I have a boy and a girl, and I kind of stand in the middle, and I'm like, it's very difficult because I look at a lot of the behavior by the young women or young girls, and I disagree with that.
Yeah.
Sort of, you start questioning, are we as parents doing something? Yeah. But that culture grows. Yeah. And that's what sells, and that what kind of gets attention. We're sort of retreating in the wrong direction, I think. So
I completely agree. And all these boys have mothers and fathers, and they have homes. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's all part of the evolutionary journey. But we've all come from that place as well. We've all come from families. We were all born into a family, and we come from that family of origin, and we come from that ancestral line.
Yeah, but that's very cultural. I'm talking much more personal.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. I was with a friend yesterday. It's nobody that everybody knows here.
Let's call her Fred.
Fred. She was telling me about her daughter being promiscuous.
Yeah.
And she thinks, talking about ancestry, because she believes in that, she thinks it's down the lineage of her brother, her husband's half sister, and they go back to, I can't remember. I mean, she goes back to an ancestry of that kind of promiscuity. Now, I was listening to it. I thought it was very interesting because I'd never thought about it that way. So you're talking about culture. So I understand the culture. Every culture has its, strange things, but that is quite specific. Promiscuity in your child. And then you relate it back to sort of ancestry.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Of course. But it's both. It's cultural and ancestral, because what you do find, if a girl of 16, 17 has 4, 5, 6, 7 partners, she's promiscuous. But if a boy has 6, 7 partners, he's having fun or so on his own. So again, there's a cultural issue, but there's also an ancestral issue. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole change of, and actually in the big cities in this country, my understanding from what I've read is that, girls of 15, 16, 17 go out en masse and they want to sleep with someone a Friday, Saturday night, a different partner. And so they're behaving. Boys, actually, a lot of boys are much more withdrawn now.
Yes.
Yeah. So all these patterns exist. But it's like, how do we get through them, and how do we talk about them, and how do we see what's underneath them? Because it's not really what's happening out there. But the thing I was saying, which I think is true, we can try and deal with these in the outer world through rules or through, new guidelines or blah, 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 but it ain't going to work. It's not going to work enough for us individually or collectively. You've got to get to what's underneath that. And you've got to see what's driving it. Otherwise, you're not going to change the pattern. That seems obvious to me, but maybe it's not to other people.
It is.
Let's have supper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew.